Too many people attribute success to luck, or they complain that the best have some kind of God-given talent, which is a pretty defeatist attitude to take towards something, especially if that thing is something you want to have a career in, like music. So what if there was a formula for creating skill that was backed in science? Wouldn't knowing that we all have an equal opportunity to be great inspire you to get to work and do it? Welcome back, y'all. I'm Travis Ferentz, a Grammy-nominated recording engineer and mixer, and I started this show to help people like you achieve their dreams of a career in music. So I've been in this industry for about 20 years, and I've gotten the chance to see a lot of people grow to become insanely talented and successful. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of people burn out and fade away as well. And the common thread of those that became great was always focused practice and hard work. It was never that they just happened to get lucky. And if you've never been in the studio with a band full of A-list session musicians or hit songwriters, you'd probably think that it must be inspiring, right? And it is, but at the same time, it can leave you thinking, holy shit, I will never be that good, which is a limiting belief that we've all had pop up in the back of our mind at least once. Don't lie, you've thought it. And so I used to think that way as well before I read a book called The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle, which really breaks down the science of skill mastery and basically throws the excuse of luck or God-given talent right out the door. So in this episode, we're going to talk through Daniel's book and cover what deep practice really is, the importance of what Daniel calls ignition for your career, and the role of mentors, coaches, and peers. But before we get into that, we have got to talk about the science. Every human skill is acted out by chains of nerve fibers carrying electrical impulses from point A to point B. A neural insulator called myelin wraps these fibers and allows those impulses to travel faster, also prevents them from leaking out. The more we fire a particular fiber, translation practice that skill, the more myelin our body wraps around it, essentially building a bigger freeway for those impulses to travel on. Now, the thicker the myelin layers get, the more that associated skill develops and improves. There are four main points to note about myelin. One, it's the firing of the nerves that builds it. The act of constantly watching tips videos or watching someone play guitar is not going to develop your skill. Myelin build is a response to the repetition of that nerve firing. Two, myelin is universal to all manners of skill, mental and physical. Three, myelination happens in one direction. Once a skill is well developed and the nerve is wrapped, it does not unwrap, except through age or disease. This is why your friend that golfed in high school can still beat you even though he only plays once a year. And four, age matters. So for children, myelin arrives in a series of waves, hence why you'll notice big jumps in development as your kids grow up. These waves continue all the way into your 30s. This is why some of the greatest talents we know usually started at a younger age. Now, this isn't to say that you can't build myelin later in life. We never lose the ability to develop it. It just develops at a much slower pace. Now, the reason I wanted to share the science side of this with you is that we can now draw a very simple comparison to muscle growth, something that we all understand. If you want to build a muscle, you target it with a specific workout. And skills are the exact same. If you want to grow your skill, you just have to target it with the right form of practice. Deep practice. So what is deep practice? Are you deep practicing when you sit down at the piano for 3 hours and play whatever comes to mind? Unfortunately, no. That's how I practiced guitar. I'd play for hours every day, but I was just playing what was fun to me at the time. And when I walked into my first guitar class at music school, I quickly learned that I was lucky to have even gotten in. The growth of myelin is dependent on practicing in what Daniel calls the sweet spot, where you're stretching the limits of your abilities, but not so far that it seems impossible. You have to be operating at the edge of where you will make mistakes so that you're forced to recognize those mistakes, slow them down, and then correct them. If you're not pushing your abilities, then you are not adding reps to your myelin. So while researching his book, Daniel traveled the world visiting and studying talent hotbeds to try to understand how specific places and periods of time generated so much high-level talent. Through those travels, he came up with 3 rules for deep practice. Rule 1 is chunk it up. First, you must take in the skill as a whole, absorb it, and imagine yourself doing it. Daniel saw this escalated to the next level at a small, single-court tennis training club in Russia that somehow produced more top 20 ranking women than the entire United States did from 2005 to 2007. Here, he saw players perform a ballet-like choreography of slow motion tennis, but without ever hitting a ball. They just imagined that they were playing the game. The next step of chunking is to break things down into smaller segments and then master those segments. Along with this is the act of slowing things down to really notice the nuance and recognize your mistakes. These were demonstrated to the extreme at Meadowmount School of Music in upstate New York, which boasts graduates such as Yo-Yo Ma and Joshua Bell. One of the practices at this school is for students to cut their sheet music up into horizontal strips and pull them out at random with the goal of mastering the individual components of a piece. They also have a philosophy of practicing sections at such slow tempos that the piece is unrecognizable. And that brings us to the second rule of deep practice, which is repetition. Now, this seems fairly obvious, but there is a key requirement to this repetition: that you must remain at the edge of your ability. 2 hours of practice is only twice as productive as 1 if you're in that sweet spot. Shockingly, Daniel found that the amount of time spent practicing at some of these talent hotbeds was remarkably low. That Russian tennis club, for example, practiced only 15 hours a week. Finally, the third rule of deep practice: learn to feel it. This is a bit harder to grasp onto, probably because as humans, we hate to be wrong, so it's really easy for us to ignore our mistakes. But the goal here is to feel and recognize that you have made a mistake, then stop and correct. Don't just practice through it without acknowledging it. Now, Daniel asked people at the various talent hotbeds he visited for words to describe their best practice sessions, and I think that this is actually the best way to understand this concept of learn to feel it. And they gave him words like attention, connect, build, mistake, repeat, alert, and edge. Nowhere in the list were words like flow, natural, or effortless. So with all that in mind, I think it's pretty obvious how deep practice would accelerate your skill development, but it also seems pretty obvious that it's not going to be very much fun to do. And that's where Daniel's term ignition comes in. Ignition is the motivation you need to commit to doing the hard work necessary to become world class. Many times, this motivation and passion is triggered by someone achieving the seemingly impossible, thus making it now within the realm of possibility for everybody else. An example from Daniel's studies is when 20-year-old South Korean Se-Ri Pak won the 1998 LPGA Championship. She was the first South Korean to achieve that level of success in golf and became a national icon. 10 years later, the LPGA would be dominated by South Koreans, with 45 players winning over 1/3 of the events. Another example of being motivated by others, I've been reading Arnold Schwarzenegger's book recently, and he talks about how he was shocked during one of his first international competitions when he saw the form on some of the American bodybuilders' calves, a muscle that he himself wasn't really focusing on. He then used that as his motivation to go back and do the work necessary to return and, I believe, win the competition the following year. Daniel also mentions that ignition comes from actually being in a hotbed itself. Imagine being a young artist in Florence during the Renaissance, or if you want a more current music industry example, maybe an up-and-coming engineer working at Sound City in its heyday. It's hard not to want to be better every day when you're surrounded by people operating at the top of their game. So the takeaway here is that in order to commit to doing the hard work that you'll need to do, you'll likely need some motivation. Now, that might be from being inspired by someone else's achievement, frustrated with your own failures, or being energized by your peer community. And speaking of peers, that brings us to the final section, the role of coaches, mentors, and your peers. Now, this is an area I have a lot of opinions on, so I'm going to stray from the talent code, but definitely still in the spirit of Dan's writing. So few people, if any, have the ability to become the greatest version of themselves on their own. Sports is definitely the most public representation of this, right? Great athletes obviously have great coaches, but they also have great trainers and likely great nutritionists working with them as well. In the business space, executive coaches have been around for years now. High-performing CEOs that want to push themselves even further, they bring in a coach. And in music, there are so many coach roles, everything from instructors to producers. There are so many situations in the music-making process where one person is helping another perform at their best. You're probably a coach to someone you're working with right now. So to go beyond the traditional coach or mentor roles, I actually think that your peer group is as important to your development as any one coach might be. It's that ignition example of being motivated by a hotbed. There's a saying that you are the average of your 5 closest friends. If you are surrounding yourself with people that are all as driven to achieve their goals as you are, then you're all going to motivate each other to do the work. That's why networking plays such a big role in this industry. Everybody's looking for people to collaborate with who all want to make each other better. So I cannot emphasize enough the importance of immersing yourself in a peer group of like-minded music professionals. And lastly, in today's digital world, I don't think you necessarily have to know your coaches or mentors. There are so many smart people putting amazing information out into the world that you can just have for free. If you live in a place where working with hit record producers is just not an option, that doesn't mean you can't still learn from those people's podcast interviews, articles, videos, etc. It's also not stopping you from hitting them up on social media or an email either. I hope this was helpful to you or that you found it interesting. I think I'm definitely going to read the talent code again. Scanning through it to make this video reminded me how many interesting stories are in there. It's a good read. And if you're into science-backed career improvement, then you might want to check out this video I did on the Super Mario effect.